Hey there, it's Lara here with your Witchy Wednesday astrology video, this time for the week of February 6th to 12th, 2019. So welcome and thank you for being here. We are still coming off the new moon in Aquarius, right? So we're still under the influence of those energies. And if you haven't yet kind of tuned into that, it's a good day to do that, right? The new moon officially happened on Monday and today's only Wednesday. So you can still harness that energy of fresh starts and new beginnings and setting some intentions for this new moon. And I spoke about the energies of the new moon in last week's video. So if you didn't get a chance to catch that, then go back and watch it. It's still relevant for you, for all of us. So on the subject of the moon is currently in Pisces right now. So when the moon is in Pisces, we have this sort of dreamy kind of energy going on, right? So we can be lacking boundaries, especially emotional boundaries, because the moon rules our emotions, right? And Pisces can be a sign that everything penetrates, and like there's no boundaries there. So that's something to be mindful of when the moon is in Pisces. And it can be hard to articulate, right, our feelings into words. So it's a really good time for creativity. So for doing some kind of creative project, right? Or for enjoying art in some way or some kind of creativity. Even movies. Good time for the more healthy forms of escapism, right? So Netflix and chill kind of thing. Also a good time, because Pisces is a water sign, for doing anything that has to do with water. So, soaking in the tub for a while, that kind of thing. It can be beneficial and lend well to this moon and Pisces energy. And then the moon moves into Aries on Friday, and that will have us, more assertive and driven. And then it moves into Taurus on Sunday. And so when the moon is in Taurus, it's a bit more slow, steady, patient, kind of sturdy approach, especially emotionally, because again, the moon is what rules, our emotions and our feelings and our intuition, that kind of thing, our emotional responses. So that's where the moon's at. And before I get to what I'm really going to focus on in this video, which is Mercury moving into Pisces, and I'll explain why I chose to focus on that when I get there. But before I do that, I have a couple of other things that I want to talk to you about. And the first is that on Thursday, so tomorrow, February 7th, we've got a couple of really nice aspects happening, right? Aspects, conversations between planets. So we have Mercury currently in Aquarius, sextiling Mars in Aries. And then a couple days later, it's also Mercury in Aquarius is going to sextile Uranus, also in Aries, right? And so this energy over the next couple of days, a sextile is a conversation of opportunity. And so this is really, highlighting our ability to be charismatic. It's good for our sort of drive, we can have courage to speak the truth under this influence, confidence in our actions, right? And opportunities to kind of speak our mind tend to go well, because this is a positive aspect. And we tend to have, a strong sort of intellect right now. So that's a nice thing that's going on over the next couple of days. And another positive aspect, I hesitate to use the word positive, because I don't so much subscribe to the notion that some things are good and some things are bad. It's more like in how we approach them, right? So, but sort of an easier flowing conversation is happening. between the Sun in Aquarius, also sextiling Jupiter in Sagittarius. So that's another sextile or conversation of opportunity that's happening. And this conversation happens only a couple of times a year, so it's good to capitalize on it when it happens. And this is optimistic energy, right? It's good for opportunity and growth and even public recognition and good fortune. So just tune into that energy and see what happens over the next couple of days. I also want to remind you something that I spoke on in last week's video was that, Uranus is at the last degree of Aries right now as we speak. So 29 degrees of Aries, and it won't be back in Aries for another like 77 years, because it takes Uranus 84 years to come back to, to circle the zodiac kind of thing. And so it was in Aries for these last 7 to 8 years, and so it won't be back there again for many decades. And so I spoke to last week how we're kind of likely going to notice this last hurrah of Uranus in Aries, right? So whatever that energy was for each of us individually and as a collective as well, we can feel the last hits of that going on right now. One of the astrologers that I follow, Rick Levine, he's an expert, been around forever, and I love his approach. He said, when he was talking about February astrology, Uranus is the instantaneous resolution of opposites that can't be resolved. So that gives you a good feel for Uranian energy and how it might play out, right? Especially in whatever house Aries sits for you. And I spoke to that in last week's video because I spoke about Mars conjuncting Uranus in Aries. And that, like, we're under that influence, but it's going to be exact on the 12th. And so you can check last week's video to find out where that's impacting you specifically, because I spoke to that in last week's video. And those two energies, Mars and Uranus, when they come together, that's some pretty big electrical charge, right? Mars is very masculine energy, and Uranus is the shock factor. So, put those two things together kind of thing. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's just powerful, So, what I really want to focus on in this video is Mercury moving into Pisces, which is happening on February 11th, on next Tuesday. And you might be wondering, why are you focusing on that? Well, because there's a couple of reasons. First off, because we have to focus on something, right? I know that people like it when I speak to each sign, and so this gives me a way of focusing that when I speak to each sign at the end of the video, but also because Mercury's going to be in Pisces for a while because it's retrograding there, and so we're under this influence from February 11th until April 17th. So that's quite a while for Mercury to be in any sign, because Mercury moves fairly quickly. But because it's retrograding on March 6th, actually, between March 6th and then moving direct on March 28th, it's going to be there for a while. And I'm going to speak specifically to the Mercury retrograde piece when we get there. But in this video, I want to talk more about the energy of Mercury in Pisces in general, and where this is falling for each, for each of you, for each sign. How we may sense it or see it out there in the collective, and then how we may experience it individually. So before I do that, I'm going to show you the chart. And before I do that, I'm going to just remind you that if you're interested in getting a personal reading with me, you can do that at my website, and you just have to click the link below and you can head over there and check out what I have to offer. And also just, thanks so much for your communications here, for your interactions. We're talking about Mercury, right? Mercury is all about communications and interactions and the collecting and dispersing of information kind of thing. So I really appreciate it when you take the time to hit the like button, to subscribe to the channel so that you can see future videos. And also, your comments, your questions, all of that. I really do appreciate it. And you can also connect with me on Facebook and Instagram. The links to those are below as well. If you're interested in, having more regular updates, and I post other things there as well. So, okay, with that out of the way, here's the chart for today, February 6th. And, okay, so we've got the sun still in Aquarius. There's Mercury in Aquarius right now, but ready to move into Pisces, right? And as I mentioned, we have the moon in Pisces today. And there is Uranus, 29 degrees of Aries, right? Just about ready to move into Taurus for the long haul. I have another video on that if you haven't watched it yet. And I'll try to remember to put the link below in case you're interested. And then there's Mars right beside Uranus, getting closer and closer there. And, there are other things obviously going on here, but I think I'm going to leave it at that for today because that's the main focus. And yeah, so, okay, so Mercury in Pisces. When I was thinking about this, I decided to use the phrase messages from spirit, because Pisces is really all about, connecting to and merging with the unseen, right? And so Mercury in Pisces is this communication with the unseen, and communicating through kind of more non-verbal ways. So Mercury in Pisces is less about attention to detail, right? And more about absorbing the energies and discerning what to kind of think or say or communicate based on that. So based on what is intuited rather than on the facts. Again, it's about nonverbal communication, largely more visual and more imaginative, right? Communication and thinking, thought processes, because Mercury rules our thought processes. Excuse me. So Mercury, people that have Mercury in Pisces tend to be quite good listeners and gentle communicators. They are prone to a kind of emotion-based communication, right? Because they are feeling all the feels, and that is what is coming through. So they base their communications on their feelings, and again on these messages that come through in perhaps what we would consider in our society unorthodox ways, I guess. So they also tend to be non-confrontational and can come across as a little bit moody because how they communicate depends on how they're feeling, really. So people with Mercury and Pisces are very good at knowing what people want to hear and how they want to hear it. So, they're very good at nuance, and they are open-minded because they see not only the big picture like Sagittarius, but beyond. It's like they see the unseen, right? They're again very driven by intuition over facts. They just know things because they know them, because they sense them. and they don't really, they don't need the hard facts to know something's true or to believe something. So when Mercury is transiting Pisces like it's doing, beginning on the 11th, again until, what did I say? I think April 17th or something, it will officially move out of Pisces. So our thinking is about the subjective versus the objective, right? We are much more sensitive to external, or not external, but to energetic stimuli. So to what's kind of floating around in the ethers, if you will. So this is not really a time to rely on or to trust the details, or, we can't really rely on logic and facts under this influence so much. It's more a time of trusting our gut, right? And tuning into our intuition. Even listening, and getting messages through our dreams, our imagination, any kind of messages that come through again from sort of the unseen world. We might also have a hard time focusing with this influence, focusing on the details, that kind of thing. It's a good time for creativity, really good time for that, for spirituality, for fantasy, for compassion and empathy, for paying attention to our intuition and honing our intuition. It's a good time to really foster our relationship with our intuition. We can be indecisive under this influence too, and more ambivalent, perhaps more gullible as well, because we're taking it all in, so it can be hard to discern which direction to go, right? Think of Pisces as the two fishes swimming in opposite directions. Or absorbing so much that it can be hard to tell fact from fiction, which is why it's so important to use our intuition at this time and to trust our gut instincts. The other thing I want to say before I start speaking to each sign here is that, as I always tell you in these videos, and if you have a reading with me, I talk about this as well. Everything there's a yin and a yang, right? There's always a sort of a light and a dark, a higher vibration and a lower vibration. And so the shadow side here is potentially deception in communications, right? We may be more vulnerable to seeing things through rose-colored glasses, and being taken advantage of or deceived, or we may be the deceivers, depends which end of the communications we're on. We also may be subject to gaslighting right now. And so, more vulnerable in terms of those things. And so it's really good to be mindful of that possibility. And again, to really ultimately let our intuition have the final say. And before I speak to each sign, I know that is much easier for some people than it is for others. And so certain people, certain signs will have an easier time navigating this energy than others do. And that will depend on, how familiar you are with this kind of Piscean, watery, mutable energy, right? And so if you have a lot of Pisces in your chart, a lot of mutability in your chart even, you might have a bit of an easier time with this energy. Whereas if you're a bit more sort of rigid and you like the facts, so for example, Virgo is the opposite sign of Pisces, right? Virgo is ruled by Mercury. Virgo is all about the details and the facts and the research and the checking off the ticky boxes and, really being very discerning. And so if that's your nature, this may be a bit frustrating for you. But for example, I have a combination of those two energies in my chart, so I can kind of, go either way depending. And so it'll be interesting to see, right? To really pay attention and see how this feels. All right, so having said that, I'm going to speak to each of the signs. And sorry, I have a dry throat. The heat keeps kicking on here, so I took a little extra time with these messages. So because, this was the focus and there wasn't a lot of other things to talk about. So I decided to take a little bit more, time to speak to this influence for each of the signs. So we're going to talk to Mercury in Pisces, right? Through the houses, through the signs. And so when I speak to your sign, I'm speaking first and foremost to a rising sign. Again, if you don't know your rising sign, if you know how to draw up your own chart, there's places you can do that online. Astro.com is one. Or you can, if you've had a reading with another astrologer, you may have your chart. Or if you have a reading with me, you would have that information. But if you don't know your rising sign right now, then that's okay. Listen for your sun sign definitely as well. That will give you some information as well. And then if you know your moon sign, you can listen for that as well. So this, I'm going to tell you what house this is happening in. And this is sort of the area of life where we would do well to trust our intuition over this transit, to listen to our dreams, to tune into our creativity and our imagination as well, right? When it comes to specifically communications, like the taking in of information, the disseminating of information, right? That kind of thing. That's what I mean. So speaking first to Aries, this is happening in your 12th house. So Mercury in Pisces lends well to the 12th house because it's the home of Pisces, the natural home. And, it's the house of the unseen, of the unconscious, the house of our dreams, of how we spend time in solitude and rest. It governs the spiritual realm. It's also traditionally known as the house of our undoing. I've heard it referred to as the house of reckoning, right? Or karma. And that's because it's in the 12th house where we, we kind of review where we've been, and we either accept it and learn from it and decide where to move next, or we sweep it under the carpet kind of thing, right? So it speaks to how we can self-sabotage, right? Through unhealthy escapism, bad habits, addictions, that kind of thing. It also rules what we call places of confinement. So those are things like hospitals, prisons, long-term care facilities, retreat centers, what else? Anything that you might consider loosely as a place of confinement. So be mindful that if you have dealings with any of those places, that communications might be unclear. So just make sure you're understanding correctly and perceiving correctly when it comes to communications, and that you're being clear in your communications if you have to deal with any of these kinds of institutions, right? Trust your intuition, ultimately, and try to be okay with the uncertainty, This is a really good time for any creative work, for any spiritual work, and also for compassionately tending to your any sort of unhealthy habits or self-sabotaging behaviors that you that you may engage in. So accepting and making peace, and accessing, well, first of all, you have to access it, accessing and accepting and making peace with whatever is kind of buried in the unconscious, right? Whatever we tend to keep stuffed back there kind of thing. It's a good time for that kind of work right now for you, Aries. All right, moving on to Taurus. Taurus, Mercury is transiting your 11th house. That's where Pisces sits for you. So that Piscean flavored communication style can be most evident in terms of your friendship groups, or any kind of groups and organizations and associations that you are part of or interact with, even online. And it can also have to do with your vision for the future. So this can be a really great opportunity to fantasize about your future, right? Your vision for the future, but not necessarily the best time to make a concrete plan that involves, filling in the details kind of thing. There can be a really compassionate and empathetic and creative and even spiritual quality to group situations. So any group situations that you're in. Or on the shadow side, as I mentioned, this can have to do with, deception or unclear communications in group settings as well. So, or, even sort of deceiving yourself or seeing your vision for the future being really clouded by, rose-colored glasses kind of thing. So you may not be perceiving accurately at this time. So trust the messages, trust your intuition here when it comes to those matters of groups and friendships and even your, future vision. All right, Gemini. Gemini, this is happening in your 10th house. So the transit of Mercury through your 10th house, which is Pisces for you, can bring dreaminess and softer communications and even creativity in relation to your career, to your public reputation and status and image, your worldly ambitions, and even with how you deal with authority as well. So it can be a good time for any kind of career movement that has to do with, creativity or the arts. It can be a good time for getting your creative work noticed. And when I say creative work, be mindful, that's a big umbrella there in terms of what constitutes creative work, right? So it is a good time potentially for getting your work noticed, for communicating out there in the world, your public message in a more creative way, even. Publishing, getting noticed for something that you created or wrote, or, a piece of art, or, just there's many things that fall into that category. And on the shadow side, there's also a possibility for delusion and deception, right? And confusion and even gullibility in those 10th house matters of career and public reputation and authority. So all might not be as it appears, right? Or more accurately, as you're perceiving, or someone is communicating to you that it is. So trust your gut over your head at this time. And that's the best approach to those 10th house matters. Thanks, Gemini. Okay, moving on to Cancer. Cancer, with Mercury in Pisces transiting your 9th house, this is good energy for listening to how you feel, right? Tuning into your intuition when it comes to your belief systems, to, your philosophies, your worldview, even any kind of dogma that you may be either, subscribed to or associated with, or like that crosses your path kind of thing. Also with education, teaching, learning, and also travel. So trust your intuition over the quote unquote facts, right? As the facts may not be accurate, right? They might not be as they appear. So this is a good time for taking or teaching some kind of creative class, for example. It can also be beneficial transit for connecting with compassionate and empathetic teachers or guides. It's a good time for some kind of travel that's centered around the arts, or creativity or spirituality as well. So travel, involving those things can be good now. And ultimately, Cancer, guard against being deceived or gaslit in these areas too, right? And so, for example, maybe some kind of information being communicated to you through teachers, gurus, religious figures, universities, even travel agents, is not as it sounds or appears, or not as you are perceiving it with your head. So trust your intuition, when it comes to those ninth house things. All right, Leo, this transit happens in your eighth house. So this is ultimately good energy for compassionate and empathetic communications in vulnerable and intimate situations. So, for example, it's a good time for connecting with like a compassionate therapist, right? Maybe even somebody who uses like a dream therapy or art therapy as part of their practice. It can be a good time for something like that. And because the eighth house is about shared resources, it could be like you get news of some, windfall that has a Piscean flavor to it. So it could be somebody makes a donation to a charity in your name. It could be you inherit, a piece of artwork, like a family, heirloom kind of thing. Or you sell a piece of artwork, as well, and you benefit from that. So it could have to do with something like that. Also, though, there could be a chance of unclear and confusing communications in those areas. So around taxes, insurance, credit cards, inheritance, loans, bursaries, that kind of thing. So just guard against, charlatans kind of thing when it comes to those things, and be mindful also of power struggles in that arena as well. Trust your gut ultimately, and don't fall prey to kind of too good to be true schemes. Really tune in to what feels right in those eighth house matters. Okay, Leo, that's for you. Moving on to Virgo. I have reams and reams of notes here, so excuse the page turning. Virgo, this energy is transiting your seventh house. And the seventh house has to do with our one-to-one relationships, right? Close partnerships. So this can bring gentleness and compassion and empathy in your communications with those people that you're really close to in a one-to-one relationship with. That can be, a marriage or a close partnership. It can also be a business partnership, for example. So it can be a good time to soften communications with a rival as well, because the seventh house also rules what we know as our, like way back in the day, they used to call it our I think, known enemies or something. So basically, if you have a personal rivalry with somebody, then this can be a good time to kind of soften the edges there in terms of how you communicate. This is also a good time to bring some creativity or fantasy or imagination into your one-to-one relationships as well. So going to see music, movies, art galleries, taking a painting class with a spouse, for example, is a good time for that. And it may be a time where there is more unspoken communication in your one-to-one partnerships. So less of a need to kind of verbally communicate, and more intuitive communication happening. But be mindful of the shadow side there, right? So deceptive or unclear communications in one-to-one relationships. Trust your intuition when it comes to communications in relationships. And, just know that the facts might seem to be saying one thing, but your gut might be telling you something else. So pay attention to that. It's not to make you paranoid. It's not what this is about. Just saying that, you know, don't rely solely on your intellect and on the facts and the logic at this time. It's not a good time for just relying solely on that. So try your best to be patient, right? When you're communicating in one-to-one situations, and embrace that Piscean ability to go with the flow. Okay, moving on to Libra. Libra, this is happening in your sixth house. So this could be, it could be a bit tricky in terms of the daily grind, like the daily communications, Libra. Mercury is transiting that sixth house, that governs our daily grind, our health and wellness routines, also our unpaid work, how we are of service to others. So it can be really great energy for bringing more compassion and empathy, and, even creativity and imagination to your daily grind kind of thing. All those things I just mentioned. But can also be a time where there's some confusion regarding those matters on the day-to-day. So, you're going to have to rely on your ability to sort of read between the lines, and tune into the unspoken messages. This may also, it sort of depends on what else is going on in your chart, but it might aggravate that sort of Libran tendency to weigh all sides and have some difficulty making a decision or landing on a decision, right? So, because, Piscean energy is very mutable and kind of, nebulous. So trust your intuition, ultimately, when it comes to your daily grind, your health and wellness. This can be a great time for compassionate service work. And just on the subject of your health and wellness, when it comes to that, just be mindful of unclear communications there regarding health matters. It could be that you encounter some kind of, doctor or health practitioner, somebody in the wellness community that's really gentle and compassionate, right? They have that way about them of communicating. But ultimately, the message there is trust your intuition when it comes to your health and wellness. Don't necessarily just trust your logic at this time, or the facts as they appear. So, okay, moving on to Scorpio. Scorpio, this transit is happening in your fifth house. So you might suddenly find you have more patience with your kids or children that you work with, right? You may be more compassionate and empathetic in your communications with children. And that's always nice. It might be that there's some confusion or lack of clarity as well in communications with children or regarding children. So trust your gut ultimately when it comes to that, right? And don't be paranoid, but just, tune into to how it feels, right? And because the fifth house also rules creative self-expression, it's a really nice time for creative communications kind of thing. So expressing yourself in a creative way through music, through art, through poetry, through creative writing, through even dance, or some other art form. It's a really perfect way to embrace this energy. You also might find that you want to spend your leisure time during this transit doing more creative things as well, or things that have to do with, your intuition, spirituality, that kind of thing. So even things like watching movies, right, can come under this influence too. But be mindful of not falling prey to delusion and gaslighting and even hard luck stories when it comes to, your creative pursuits, or dealing with children or your inner child. And even when it has to do with, what we do for fun kind of thing as well. So just be mindful of that. But all in all, I think the fifth house is not a bad place for this to be happening for you, Scorpio. Sagittarius, this is happening in your fourth house. So this can bring some, warm, fuzzy communications to your family dealings. in your home setting, even with a mother figure, or even in terms of your own emotional security as well. So, family members can be more compassionate, more empathetic in their communications right now towards you, and you towards them as well. You might even bring some kind of, creative communication into your home environment, into your family. So, like, I don't know, maybe you're going to host a house concert. Or there's some kind of like family artistic kind of collaboration going on. Or even just bringing more art into your home kind of thing, into your home environment. So matters around home improvement or home repair or real estate dealings, or even communications with family members, they can be a bit fuzzy, a bit unclear, a bit uncertain under this influence, or perhaps seem too good to be true. So trust your intuition, because again, the facts may not be accurate, or you may be perceiving them not as they were intended, kind of thing. Your brain may not be interpreting the messages accurately, and that's when you need to tune into your intuition to be more discerning when it comes to those fourth house matters. All right, Capricorn, this is happening in your third house. So Capricorn, the third house is the natural house of Mercury, right? It's most aptly referred to as the house of communications. And Mercury, truthfully, doesn't really love the lack of clarity that Pisces energy can bring. So for you, Capricorn, your communications in general are kind of impacted under this influence, right? The taking in and the spreading of messages over this transit can ideally have a Piscean flavor to them, right? Be compassionate, be empathetic, be creative and gentle. But it can also cause confusion if we're listening and speaking only with our heads and not tuning into our intuition. So this can have an impact on siblings, on cousins, on peers, and your communications with those people. It can even impact short commutes. There can be some confusion around that. So, be mindful, trust your intuition, read between the lines, tune into the messages beyond the words. It might be a good time for communications involving arts, creativity, fantasy, poetry, creative writing. Publishing a creative work even at this time is a good way to use this energy, Capricorn. Okay, moving on to Aquarius. Aquarius, this energy is impacting your second house of resources, of how you use your skills and talents to make money and support yourself, of your values and material possessions and self-worth. So any communications in that area are going to be under the influence of this Mercury transiting Pisces, right? So this means that you can be creative in how you make money right now. It can have you contemplating what you value and bringing sort of a more Piscean spiritual flavor to that. Like, what's really important sort of thing. What do I really value? There can be compassionate, gentle communications in this area. So it talks about money and resources and how you earn, what you value, and even when it comes to your self-talk, right? Which affects our self-worth. It can be a great time, great energy for being kinder to ourselves, Aquarius, and calming your inner critic. Also, it's possible that you may be a bit fuzzy, a bit delusional, a bit unclear in terms of money and resources under this influence too. So just trust your intuition here, right? If the facts seem off, trust that. It is a good time to communicate also about creative ways to make money. So through the arts, through imagination, through spirituality. So brainstorming those possibilities without getting too caught up in the details just yet is good use of this energy. And Pisces, for you, this influence is in your first house. So the good news is, being a Pisces, you're used to the ethereal quality of this energy, right? You're more comfortable than most with this kind of go with the flow thing. This transit of Mercury through your sign can have you bringing a sort of dreamy, artsy flavor to how you approach the world. And on the first impression that you make, that's the first house. So you might come across right now as extra Piscean, right? In the way you dress, in the way you speak, in how you react, to how you appear to the outside world, sort of thing. So be careful, Pisces, not to fall prey to, the rose-colored glasses kind of approach here. When it comes to any drastic changes, specifically to your physical appearance. So like plastic surgery is not necessarily a good idea right now. Because you may be getting inaccurate information about the process, or might have an unrealistic notion of how things will turn out. This might be a time when some Pisces put themselves out there as like mediums, dream interpreters, psychics, artists, that kind of thing. Pisces, ultimately, you're very good at trusting your intuition already, so pay special attention, right, to those messages at this time. Do the Pisces thing that you know how to do so well. And that is that for all 12 signs. Thanks for being here with me. And I really do hope that, this video helps you navigate the Mercury and Pisces transit that we're under until mid-April. And I will talk to you next week, okay? Take good care. Bye-bye.